If you grew up in the 1980s, you remember a world that ran on a completely different set of rules. Things that were totally normal back then would get you reported, fired, or at the very least stared at in horror today. Your parents let you do things that would make a modern helicopter parent faint. Your boss said things at work that would now end up in a lawsuit. And the stuff they sold to kids in stores would not survive 5 minutes on a shelf in 2026. Number 96 on this list was something millions of Americans did at their desks every single workday, and today it would get you escorted out of the building before lunch. Somewhere around number 45, you will hear about something that happened in nearly every office in America, and today it would get someone fired on the spot. And by the time this list is done, you might wonder how any of us made it through that decade in one piece. So hit subscribe and settle in, because here are 100 things from the 1980s that are not socially acceptable today. Number 100. Smacking someone else's child at the grocery store. In the 1980s, if a kid knocked over a display or threw a tantrum at the Piggly Wiggly, it was not unheard of for a nearby adult to swat them on the backside and say, "Knock it off." The parent might nod in approval. The cashier would not blink. There was a collective understanding that any grown-up in the vicinity had provisional authority over any child within arm's reach. Try that in 2026 and you are facing assault charges, a viral video, and a very angry parent calling the police. The whole concept of communal discipline has evaporated. Today, you do not even look at someone else's kid too long without risking a confrontation. But in the 1980s, it was just the village raising the children, one swat at a time. Number 99. Throwing away perfectly good food without a second thought. Leftovers from dinner went straight into the trash can in millions of American homes during the 1980s. Nobody wrapped them, nobody froze them, nobody composted them. Half a pot roast, a pile of mashed potatoes, the last few slices of meatloaf, into the garbage. The idea of food waste as a moral issue, an environmental crisis, or even a mild social faux pas simply did not exist. Restaurants threw out enormous quantities every night without a whisper of guilt. School cafeterias dumped trays of uneaten sloppy joes by the hundreds. Today, posting a photo of a half-eaten plate going into the trash would invite outrage. Composting programs, food rescue apps, and the phrase "reduce food waste" have turned what was once a thoughtless daily act into something that carries real social judgment. Number 98. No car seats for toddlers. In the 1980s, a baby's first car ride home from the hospital usually happened in someone's arms. The mother held the newborn in the front seat, maybe with a loose blanket around it, and the father drove carefully. That was considered sufficient. Car seats existed, but they were flimsy plastic shells that clipped onto the bench seat with a single strap. Many families never used one at all. Toddlers stood on the back seat, leaned over the front, or sat on a parent's lap. The first federal car seat safety standard did not arrive until 1981, and even then compliance was spotty for years. Today, leaving a child unrestrained in a moving car is one of the fastest ways to get a visit from Child Protective Services. Some families propped the baby between two adults in the front seat using bodies as barriers instead of restraints. Others placed the infant in a Moses basket on the floor of the back seat where it slid around with every turn. Number 97. Letting your dog roam the neighborhood unleashed all day. In the 1980s, you opened the back door in the morning and your dog was gone until supper time. He wandered the block, visited other yards, maybe followed the kids to the park. Nobody called animal control. Nobody panicked. If the dog turned up 3 streets over, a neighbor would check the collar tag and walk him home. Leash laws existed in a few cities, but enforcement was almost non-existent in the suburbs and small towns. Dogs just roamed. They got into trash cans, chased squirrels across busy roads, and occasionally got into scraps with other roaming dogs. Today, an unleashed dog in most neighborhoods means a fine, a worried post on the neighborhood app, and possibly a visit from animal services. The free-range dog era ended quietly, one leash ordinance at a time. Number 96. Smoking in the office all day long. In the 1980s, almost every office in America had ashtrays on the desks. People smoked while they typed memos, smoked during phone calls, smoked through meetings. The haze in a conference room after a long afternoon session could sting your eyes. Ashtrays sat next to the coffee pot and the water cooler, like they were part of the standard office supply kit. Nobody filed a complaint, nobody asked permission. Your boss might light up a cigar during your annual review, blowing smoke across the desk while discussing your future. Try lighting a cigarette at your cubicle today and security would escort you out before the first ash fell. The entire concept of smoking indoors at work disappeared so completely that most people under 40 cannot even picture it. Number 95. Making jokes about someone's ethnicity at the dinner table. Family gatherings in the 1980s often came with a side of ethnic humor. Uncles told polished jokes. Grandfathers did exaggerated accents. Aunts repeated stereotypes they had heard at the beauty parlor as though they were compliments. Nobody flinched. The laughter came easy, and if someone from the targeted group happened to be in the room, they were expected to laugh along or risk being called too sensitive. Joke books organized by nationality sat on coffee tables in living rooms across America. Television programs built entire characters around ethnic caricatures and won Emmy Awards for it. Today, the same jokes would end a holiday dinner early. Social awareness has shifted so dramatically that what once passed as harmless ribbing is now understood as something that diminishes and dehumanizes. The joke books are long gone, and so is the permission to tell what was in them. Number 94. Leaving kids alone in the car. A mother running into the grocery store in 1984 would think nothing of leaving her children in the parked car with the windows cracked. It happened every day in every parking lot in America. Kids sat in the back seat reading comics, fighting with their siblings, or just staring out the window while a parent grabbed milk and bread. Nobody called the police. Nobody called it neglect. It was called running an errand. Today, leaving a child unattended in a vehicle, even for a few minutes, can result in criminal charges in many states. Passers-by have been known to break car windows if they spot a child inside on a warm day. Some parents left the car running with the air conditioning on and considered that sufficient protection. In winter, the logic reversed. The car was warm, the store was quick, and the child was sleeping. The calculation was always convenience weighed against a risk that most people believed was close to zero. Number 93. Riding without seatbelts. Seatbelt laws were practically non-existent for most of the 1980s. New York became the first state to pass a mandatory seatbelt law in 1984, and even then, a huge percentage of Americans ignored it. Kids sprawled across the back seat like it was a living room couch. Adults drove with one arm out the window and nothing across their chest. Station wagons had rear-facing seats in the cargo area where children bounced around with zero restraint. Wearing a seatbelt was seen by many as a personal choice, not a safety requirement. The click it or ticket campaigns that changed public behavior did not gain real traction until the late 1990s. Nadani, driving without a seatbelt feels almost as reckless as driving blindfolded. Children climbed into the cargo area of station wagons and lay flat on the carpeted surface, staring up through the rear window at the cars behind them. Road trips were measured in hours spent rolling freely around the back of a vehicle. The idea that every passenger needed an individual restraint system was simply not how Americans thought about car travel. Number 92. Casual drunk driving. Drinking and getting behind the wheel was not treated as the serious crime it is today. Plenty of adults drove home from bars, parties, and dinners after several drinks, and nobody at the table tried to stop them. Designated drivers were not a concept most people had heard of. Police officers who pulled over a weaving driver on a back road might tell them to take it slow and follow them home. Mothers Against Drunk Driving was founded in 1980 and spent the entire decade pushing for stricter laws, but cultural attitudes were slow to change. The blood alcohol limit in many states was higher than it is now, and enforcement was inconsistent. Today, a single DUI can cost thousands of dollars and end a career. Office parties, neighborhood barbecues, and high school reunions ended with everyone finding their own way home, and nobody asked how. A host who suggested a guest was too drunk to drive risked offending them. The social pressure cut the wrong way. Speaking up about someone's drinking was considered intrusive, not responsible. Number 91. Liquor cabinets in the office. In the 1980s, a bottle of scotch in a desk drawer was not a sign of a problem. It was a sign of status. Corner offices in law firms, advertising agencies, and brokerage houses came equipped with crystal decanters and a short glass. Pouring a drink for a client during a meeting was considered hospitable. Colleagues toasted closed deals in the conference room at 2 in the afternoon. Some executives kept a full bar cart next to their filing cabinets. It was the tail end of a culture that had glorified business drinking for decades, and the 1980s were the last era when it was openly acceptable. Today, most companies have strict policies against alcohol in the workplace, and an open bottle on a desk would prompt a conversation with human resources. Client meetings that ended without a drink felt incomplete. Sales teams celebrated quarters with champagne in the conference room. The mailroom clerk knew which executives kept their bottles in the bottom left drawer. Alcohol was not just tolerated in the American workplace of the 1980s, it was infrastructure. Number 90. Smoking on airplanes. For most of the 1980s, you could light up a cigarette at 30,000 feet. Airlines designated the last few rows of the cabin as the smoking section, as if tobacco smoke respected invisible boundaries. Flight attendants walked the aisle handing out tiny foil ashtrays. The smell soaked into seat cushions, overhead bins, and the recycled cabin air that everyone breathed for the entire flight. Non-smokers seated near the dividing row had no real escape. Domestic flights in the United States did not fully ban smoking until 1990. International flights held out even longer. Today, smoking on an airplane is a federal offense that can result in fines and arrest upon landing. Non-stop flights from New York to Los Angeles meant 5 hours trapped in a sealed tube with dozens of lit cigarettes. The airline's solution was to put smokers in the back, as if smoke understood assigned seating. Passengers in the rows just ahead of the smoking section got the worst of both worlds, no ashtray and all the fumes. Number 89. Catcalling women on the street. Construction workers, delivery drivers, and random men on sidewalks felt entitled to shout comments at women walking by. Whistling, honking, yelling things like "nice legs" or "hey beautiful" from a car window was treated as flattery. Women were expected to smile, take it as a compliment, or at most ignore it and keep walking. Complaining about it made you uptight. Movies and television reinforced the idea that a man hollering at a woman from a scaffold was charming. The conversation around street harassment did not shift in a meaningful way until the 2010s. Today, catcalling is widely recognized as a form of harassment, and in some cities it can carry legal consequences. The assumption behind it was that women existed in public space as visual objects, and that a man's assessment of their appearance was a gift they should appreciate. Women who talked back were called names. Women who complained to police were laughed at. Number 88. Lead paint on children's toys. Throughout the 1980s, children chewed on, sucked on, and put their mouths all over toys coated in paint that contained lead. Bright red wagons, painted wooden blocks, toy soldiers, and imported figurines all carried the risk. Lead paint had been banned for residential use in 1978, but the regulation of toys lagged behind. Cheap imported products flooded dollar stores and flea markets with little oversight. Parents had no way of knowing what was in the coating on a plastic doll or a set of miniature farm animals. The full scope of lead's damage to developing brains was only beginning to be understood. Today, strict testing standards apply to every toy sold in the United States, and a lead paint recall makes national headlines. A child could spend years chewing on a painted toy, and the symptoms of lead exposure, learning difficulties, behavioral changes, stunted development, would not appear until the damage was already done. Number 87. Fat shaming as small talk. Commenting on someone's weight was a perfectly normal part of conversation in the 1980s. Relatives greeted each other at holiday gatherings with lines like, "Looks like you put on a few pounds." Co-workers made jokes about someone's lunch. Doctors told patients to stop being lazy. Television comedies built entire characters around the punchline of being overweight. Diet culture was everywhere, and thinness was treated as a moral achievement. Telling someone they looked heavy was not considered rude. It was considered honest. The body positivity movement and the broader cultural shift toward not commenting on other people's bodies did not gain real momentum until decades later. Today, making unsolicited remarks about someone's weight is considered deeply inappropriate in most social settings. Wedding guests told brides they looked heavier than expected. Coaches told athletes they were getting soft. Job interviewers looked applicants up and down and made notes. The cruelty was casual and constant, and it was distributed across every social setting without apology. People who carried extra weight in the 1980s navigated a world that reminded them. 86. Teachers smoking in the classroom. It was not unusual to walk into a classroom in the early 1980s and find the teacher with a cigarette in one hand and a piece of chalk in the other. High school teachers smoked in the hallways between classes. College professors lit up during lectures. Teacher lounges were thick with smoke, and the smell clung to everything. Students in some schools could smell tobacco before they even opened the classroom door. Schools began banning indoor smoking through the mid to late 1980s, but enforcement varied wildly by district. Today, a teacher lighting a cigarette inside a school building is almost unimaginable, and doing so would be grounds for immediate disciplinary action. The smell of tobacco mixed with chalk dust was the sensory backdrop of education for an entire generation. Some teachers balanced a cigarette on the edge of their desk while writing on the blackboard. Number 85. Kids disappearing from the house until the streetlights came on. This was not neglect in the 1980s. It was just called summer. The moment school let out, kids poured out of their houses and into the neighborhood with no adult supervision, no cell phone, no GPS tracker, and no scheduled activity. You grabbed your bike, told your mother you were going to a friend's house, and vanished for 8 or 9 hours. You played in drainage ditches, climbed trees with dead branches, explored construction sites, walked along railroad tracks, and built ramps out of plywood and cinder blocks to jump your bicycle off of. Nobody checked in. Nobody called. The rule was simple. Be home when the streetlights come on. If you got hurt, you walked it off or went to a neighbor's house. If you got in trouble, the whole block knew about it before your parents did, because every adult on the street had informal permission to yell at you. Parents did not worry about kidnappings, traffic, or lawsuits. They trusted the neighborhood, and the neighborhood operated like an unspoken co-op of mutual supervision. A kid could walk half a mile to the corner store, buy a candy bar with coins from under the couch cushions, and walk back without a single adult raising an eyebrow. That kind of freedom is almost impossible to imagine today. Parents who let their children roam unsupervised for an entire day risk having their neighbors call the authorities. The phrase free-range parenting now requires a label and a defense, when in the 1980s it was simply called childhood. The vacant lot down the street was a kingdom. The creek behind the strip mall was an afternoon expedition. A kid with a stick and an imagination could turn a storm drain into a cave and a pile of dirt into a fortress. There were no organized play dates, no sign-up sheets, no waivers. If you showed up at the right time, you were in the game. Teams were chosen on the spot, rules were invented on the fly, and disputes were settled with shouting or a fistfight that was forgotten by the next morning. Injuries were common and rarely reported to adults. Number 84. Racial jokes in mainstream. Comedy. Stand-up specials, sitcoms, and variety shows in the 1980s regularly featured humor built on ethnic stereotypes. Comedians performed entire routines based on accents, cultural caricatures, and racial generalizations, and audiences laughed. Primetime television wrote characters who existed mostly as punchlines about their background. Sketch shows aired segments that would be pulled from the internet within minutes today. It was treated as harmless entertainment, and anyone who objected was told they had no sense of humor. The line between edgy comedy and outright racism was drawn far wider than it is now. Today, a comedian who builds a set around ethnic stereotypes faces immediate public backlash and career consequences. The comedy specials of the era played to packed theaters and aired on network television without disclaimers or content warnings. Audiences did not distinguish between a comedian who explored racial themes with nuance and one who simply repeated stereotypes for easy laughs. The market rewarded both equally, and the absence of public accountability meant the laziest, most harmful material circulated without friction. Number 83. Sending your kid to the store to buy cigarettes. A 10-year-old walking into a gas station with a note from a parent and a $5 bill could walk out with a pack of Marlboros, no questions asked. Shopkeepers knew the family, recognized the handwriting, and handed over the cigarettes without hesitation. Some stores did not even require the note. If you looked like you were on an errand, that was good enough. Kids buying cigarettes for their parents was treated the same as kids buying bread or milk. It was just another chore. Age verification at the point of sale was essentially non-existent for most of the decade. Today, selling tobacco to a minor is a criminal offense, and stores face heavy fines if they fail to check identification. The transaction was quick and transactional, no different from buying a newspaper. In some neighborhoods, kids ran cigarette errands for elderly neighbors too, earning a quarter for the trip. The corner store was the supply chain, and children were the couriers, moving freely between the adult world and their own without anyone questioning the arrangement. Number 82. Burning trash in the backyard. If you grew up in a neighborhood with any amount of yard space in the 1980s, you knew the smell. Somebody was always burning something. Families burned leaves, old newspapers, cardboard boxes, broken furniture, and just about anything else they wanted to get rid of in a rusty barrel or a pit in the back corner of the yard. Entire neighborhoods had a permanent haze on weekend mornings. Nobody called the fire department. Nobody worried about the fumes. It was considered the cheapest and most efficient way to handle household waste, especially in areas where trash pickup was expensive or infrequent. Open burning bans have since been enacted in most municipalities. Today, lighting a fire in your backyard to dispose of garbage can result in fines and a visit from local code enforcement. The barrel was a permanent fixture in many backyards, blackened by years of use and surrounded by scorched earth. Number 81. Giving a child a sip of coffee. In the 1980s, when a toddler reached for a parent's coffee mug, the response in millions of households was to let them have a taste. A small sip of black coffee or a dip of a sugar-dusted donut into the cup was considered harmless, maybe even a cute milestone. Diners served coffee to 10-year-olds without a second glance. Parents joked that it would put hair on their chest. There was no conversation about caffeine limits for developing brains, no pediatric guidelines warning against it, no horrified looks from the next table. Today, handing a young child a cup of coffee in public would draw stares and unsolicited lectures. Caffeine sensitivity, sleep disruption, and childhood nutrition. Standards have turned what was once an innocent family moment into something most parents would never post on social media. Number 80. Telling someone to go on a diet right to their face at work. In the 1980s, it was common for a coworker to say something like, "You have really let yourself go," or "You might want to skip the donuts today," and mean it as friendly advice. Bosses commented on employees' weight during performance reviews. Nurses told patients to stop eating so much without any sensitivity training. Doctors prescribed diet pills and shame in equal measure. Department stores had sections labeled Husky for boys and Plus for women, tucked into corners like afterthoughts. The message was everywhere, spoken plainly and without apology. You were too heavy, and people felt entitled to say so. Today, body positivity movements, workplace harassment policies, and a deeper understanding of eating disorders have made that kind of directness professionally dangerous and socially unacceptable. Number 79. Commenting on a coworker's appearance. Telling a female colleague that she looked great in that skirt, or that she should smile more, or that she had really filled out since last summer was not considered harassment in the 1980s. It was considered office culture. Men made remarks about women's bodies in meetings, at the copier, and at company lunches without any expectation of consequences. Women who objected were labeled difficult. Dress codes for women often came with informal expectations about attractiveness, and comments about compliance were delivered openly. The legal framework for workplace harassment was still being established. Today, making unsolicited comments about a colleague's physical appearance is a textbook example of what human resources training warns against. The comments came from supervisors, peers, and subordinates alike, and they were delivered with a casualness that made them almost impossible to challenge. A woman who asked a man to stop commenting on her appearance risked being labeled humorless. Number 78. Doctors smoking during patient appointments. Through the early 1980s, it was not uncommon for a physician to have a lit cigarette going while examining a patient. Ashtrays sat on desks in examination rooms. Surgeons smoked in the break room between procedures. Dentists smoked between patients. The medical profession had known about the health risks of tobacco for decades by that point, but the culture within hospitals and clinics was slow to change. Patients sitting in a waiting room filled with cigarette smoke did not think to complain. It was just the way things were. Today, a doctor lighting up in front of a patient would face disciplinary review and likely lose their medical license. In some clinics, the waiting room ashtray was the first thing you saw when you walked in. Patients checked in for appointments about respiratory issues while breathing in cigarette smoke from the doctor down the hall. The contradiction was everywhere, but it was invisible to the people living inside it. Number 77. Hazing rituals in schools and fraternities. Being the new kid on the football team, the freshman pledge in a fraternity, or the youngest member of a club in the 1980s meant you were going to be hazed, and everyone knew it. Seniors made underclassmen carry their bags, eat disgusting things, perform humiliating tasks in public, or endure physical punishment as a rite of passage. Pledges were subjected to sleep deprivation, forced alcohol consumption, and exercises designed to break them down. Coaches looked the other way. Administrators considered it tradition. Parents who had gone through it themselves shrugged and called it a learning experience. Today, hazing is a criminal offense in most states, and universities face severe consequences when incidents come to light. Pledge classes endured weeks of sleep deprivation, humiliation, and physical pain to earn acceptance into organizations that publicly valued scholarship and leadership. The disconnect between the institution's stated values and its actual behavior was understood by everyone and challenged by almost no one. Number 76. Kids handling fireworks without adult supervision. On the 4th of July in the 1980s, every neighborhood had that one family with a trunk full of fireworks bought from a roadside stand in another state. Kids as young as 8 lit bottle rockets, tossed firecrackers into mailboxes, held Roman candles in their bare hands, and aimed them at each other. Cherry bombs were legendary. Sparklers were handed to toddlers like candy. Burns, singed eyebrows, and the occasional trip to the emergency room were accepted as part of the holiday. Adults supervised loosely, if at all. Most of the action happened in the street with no adult in sight. Today, many states have banned consumer fireworks entirely, and the ones that allow them enforce strict age requirements and safety regulations. Roman candles shot colored fireballs that bounced off garage doors and rolled under parked cars. Bottle rockets were aimed at friends, at windows, and straight up into the branches of trees. The line between celebration and property damage was blurry, and nobody drew it until something caught fire or someone went to the hospital. Number 75. Answering the phone without knowing who was calling. Every phone call in the 1980s was a surprise. There was no caller ID, no preview, no way to screen. The phone rang and you answered it. It could be your grandmother, a bill collector, a prank caller, an old flame, or a wrong number. There was no option to let it go to voicemail and call back when you felt like it, because most homes did not have an answering machine until the middle of the decade, and even then, many families refused to buy one. The expectation was that a ringing phone demanded an immediate response. You picked it up, you said hello, and you dealt with whatever came next. Today, most people will not answer a call from an unknown number. The phone has gone from a household obligation to something people ignore on principle, and answering a call from a stranger feels almost reckless. Number 74. Throwing trash out of the car window. Tossing a fast food bag, a soda can, or a cigarette butt out of a moving car was so common in the 1980s that highways had a permanent litter problem. Roadsides were lined with bottles, wrappers, and debris. The famous crying Indian public service announcement from the 1970s had made a dent, but the habit persisted well into the next decade. Ashtrays in cars existed partly because drivers routinely flicked cigarettes out the window and sometimes started brush fires doing it. Kids in the back seat threw apple cores and candy wrappers without a second thought. Anti-littering campaigns and steeper fines gradually shifted behavior through the 1990s. Today, throwing garbage from a vehicle can result in fines of several $100s in most states, and fellow drivers are not shy about reporting it. Fast food bags hit the pavement at drive-through exits. Cigarette butts accumulated in every highway median. Beer cans sparkled in ditches from coast to coast. The public attitude was that the road belonged to no one in particular, and therefore no one was responsible for keeping it clean. Number 73. Smoking while pregnant. Pregnant women in the 1980s smoked openly and often. Doctors had begun advising against it, but the advice was delivered casually, more like a suggestion than a serious warning. Plenty of obstetricians smoked themselves. Women sat in waiting rooms at prenatal appointments with a cigarette in hand. Family members did not intervene. Co-workers did not comment. A pregnant woman lighting up at a restaurant was a completely unremarkable sight. The understanding of how nicotine and carbon monoxide affect fetal development was growing, but the cultural stigma around smoking during pregnancy had not yet solidified. Today, a visibly pregnant woman smoking in public draws immediate judgment and, in some cases, unsolicited confrontation from strangers. Some women were told by their own doctors that cutting back to half a pack a day during pregnancy was an acceptable compromise. Others were told that the stress of quitting would be worse for the baby than the cigarettes themselves. The advice was contradictory, inconsistent, and shaped more by the doctor's own smoking habits than by the emerging science. Number 72. The 3-martini business lunch. In the 1980s, the business lunch was not just a meal, it was a performance, and alcohol was the opening act. Executives, sales managers, and attorneys routinely ordered cocktails before the appetizer arrived, wine with the entree, and a digestif after dessert. A 2-hour lunch that included 3 or 4 drinks was so common it had its own nickname. Expense accounts covered the tab. The company picked up the bar bill without blinking, and the IRS allowed a full deduction for business meals that included alcohol. Deals were struck over bourbon. Promotions were discussed over gin and tonics. Entire corporate hierarchies were reinforced at restaurant tables where the ability to hold your liquor was treated as a professional skill. The culture rewarded it. A man who ordered club soda at a client lunch risked being seen as weak or unserious. Secretaries knew not to schedule afternoon meetings on days their bosses had long lunches. The Tax Reform Act of 1986 started chipping away at the deductibility of business meals, and the cultural tide turned through the 1990s as companies adopted stricter policies. Today, ordering a cocktail at a business lunch is not forbidden, but 3 of them would raise eyebrows. The idea of closing a deal half-drunk in the middle of a workday belongs to a different century. The lunch was as much a negotiation tool as the boardroom. You measured a man by what he ordered and how much he could drink before his handwriting changed. Young associates were expected to keep up. Refusing a drink was read as a lack of commitment to the relationship. The restaurant knew the regulars, kept their preferred table open, and never questioned the tab. Waiters poured without asking. By 3 in the afternoon, half the executive floor had a pleasant buzz going, and nobody pretended otherwise. Board meetings held after a long lunch had a looseness to them that modern corporate governance would find horrifying. Number 71. Wearing real fur coats in public. A mink stole, a fox fur jacket, or a full-length fur coat was one of the most desired luxury items in 1980s America. Department stores had entire fur salons. Women saved for years to buy one. Men gifted them for anniversaries and holidays. Wearing fur to a dinner party or a night at the theater was a statement of success, not a source of shame. The anti-fur movement existed, but it operated on the margins. Activists with red paint made headlines, but most of the public dismissed them. The shift happened gradually through the 1990s and 2000s as animal rights organizations gained mainstream influence. Today, several major cities and the state of California have banned the sale of new fur products, and wearing a real fur coat in public in many urban areas invites open hostility. Number 70. Asbestos in homes and schools. Millions of American homes and schools built before the mid-1980s contained asbestos in their walls, ceilings, floor tiles, pipe insulation, and roof shingles. It was prized as a fireproofing material, and it was everywhere. Kids sat in classrooms surrounded by it. Families slept in bedrooms insulated with it. Workers installed it without masks or protective equipment. The link between asbestos and mesothelioma was well established by the 1980s, but removing it was expensive and disruptive. So many buildings left it in place for years. Renovation projects in older buildings still uncover asbestos today, and when they do, the work stops until a licensed abatement team handles it. The casual coexistence with a known carcinogen that defined much of 20th century construction is no longer tolerated. Ceiling tiles in classrooms crumbled and released fibers into the air. Pipe insulation wrapped around the water heater in the basement shed particles every time someone brushed against it. The danger was invisible and silent, which made it easy to ignore and catastrophic to discover. Number 69. Telling boys they are not allowed to cry. If a boy fell off his bike and scraped his knee in the 1980s, the most likely response from the nearest adult was some version of toughen up or boys do not cry. Expressing pain, fear, or sadness was treated as weakness in boys from a very young age. Fathers reinforced it. Coaches demanded it. Schools rewarded the kids who kept a stiff upper lip and shamed the ones who did not. Crying at a movie, missing your mom at camp, or showing any vulnerability in front of other boys was social suicide. The long-term emotional consequences of suppressing every feeling were not part of the conversation. Today, the understanding that emotional expression is a basic human need, regardless of gender, has changed how most parents and educators approach raising boys. The phrase acted like a switch that shut down an entire emotional system. A boy who learned at age 5 that crying was forbidden carried that lesson into adulthood, where it manifested as an inability to express vulnerability, seek help, or connect emotionally with the people closest to him. Number 68. Kids carrying pocket knives to school. A folding knife in the pocket of an 11-year-old boy heading to school in the 1980s was not alarming. It was ordinary. Kids used them to whittle sticks at recess, cut fishing line after school, and trade with friends the way they traded baseball cards. Scout troops encouraged it. Grandfathers gave them as gifts. Teachers confiscated them occasionally, but the consequence was usually getting it back at the end of the day, not a suspension. The knife was a tool, not a weapon, and nobody treated it otherwise. The zero-tolerance weapons policies that swept through American schools in the 1990s changed everything. Today, a student caught with any kind of blade on school grounds faces automatic suspension and, in many districts, expulsion. A Swiss Army knife was a status symbol among boys, and the kid who had the biggest blade earned automatic respect. Trading knives was as common as trading comic books. The schoolyard was a marketplace for pocket knives, and the currency was coolness. Number 67. Using slurs as everyday vocabulary. Words that are now universally recognized as hateful were used casually and constantly in the 1980s. Racial slurs appeared in schoolyard taunts, workplace conversations, and family dinner tables without anyone flinching. Homophobic slurs were thrown around as generic insults among teenagers and adults alike. Television scripts included language that would end a show today. The words were not always used with conscious malice, which made them harder to challenge, because the people saying them often did not understand or did not care why they were harmful. The cultural reckoning with language and its power to dehumanize has been one of the most visible social shifts of the past several decades. Today, using those words carries immediate social consequences in nearly every setting. Children absorbed the language from adults and repeated it on playgrounds without understanding its origins. The words were embedded in nursery rhymes, jump rope songs, and schoolyard chants that had been passed down for generations. Challenging the language meant challenging an entire infrastructure of casual cruelty that most people had stopped noticing. Number 66. Secretary as a women-only job title. In the 1980s, if you said the word secretary, everyone pictured a woman. The role was so thoroughly gendered that male secretaries were almost non-existent, and the few who held the job were the subject of jokes. Women in secretarial pools typed memos, answered phones, fetched coffee, and managed the schedules of male executives who were often less organized than they were. The title carried an automatic ceiling. A secretary was not expected to become a manager. She was expected to support one. The shift toward the gender-neutral title of administrative assistant began in the late 1980s, but the cultural assumption that office support work was women's work lingered far longer. Today, the old model of the female secretary serving a male boss is recognized as a product of structural sexism. Typing pools in corporate offices were staffed exclusively by women who had been tracked into the role from the moment they entered the workforce. Number 65. The housewife as the default expectation for women. When a woman married in the 1980s, the assumption in large parts of the country was that she would stop working or scale back her career to manage the home. Relatives asked when she was going to start a family, not what her professional goals were. Husbands referred to their wives as homemakers with pride. Women who continued to work full-time after having children were subtly, and sometimes openly, judged for it. The phrase working mother existed as a category precisely because staying home was considered the norm. Career-driven women faced skepticism at job interviews, resistance from in-laws, and guilt from a culture that tied a woman's value to her domestic role. Today, the expectation that a woman's primary job is running a household has largely dissolved in mainstream American culture, though its echoes remain. Number 64. Asking women about marriage and pregnancy in job interviews. Hiring managers in the 1980s routinely asked female applicants whether they were married, whether they planned to have children, and who would watch the kids if they got the job. These questions were asked openly, written into interview templates, and treated as relevant professional information. A woman who was engaged or recently married was seen as a flight risk. A pregnant applicant was often passed over without explanation. Men were never asked the same questions. The practice was technically illegal under Title VII, but enforcement was weak and most women did not know they could refuse to answer. Today, asking about family status or reproductive plans in an interview is one of the clearest violations of employment discrimination law, and companies train their hiring managers specifically to avoid it. Recruiters for major corporations asked these questions openly, recorded the answers on evaluation forms, and used them to rank candidates. The assumption that motherhood and employment were incompatible was built into the hiring pipeline, and women navigated it with a combination of evasion, deception, and resignation. Number 63. Rubbing whiskey on a teething baby's gums. When a baby was fussy from teething in the 1980s, one of the most common pieces of advice passed down from grandmothers was to dip a finger in whiskey and rub it along the baby's gums. Some parents used brandy, some used rum. The alcohol was supposed to numb the pain and calm the child. Pharmacies sold over-the-counter teething remedies that contained small amounts of alcohol or benzocaine. Pediatricians occasionally endorsed the practice. It was folk medicine that had been passed down for generations, and nobody questioned it. Today, giving any amount of alcohol to an infant is considered dangerous and irresponsible, and pediatric guidelines explicitly warn against it. The taste was medicinal and burning, and the baby usually cried harder before the numbing kicked in. Some families kept a small bottle of brandy in the nursery specifically for this purpose, labeled and set aside like any other supply. The practice was endorsed by word of mouth, reinforced by generations of family tradition, and rarely questioned by anyone, including the family pediatrician. Number 62. No food allergy awareness whatsoever. In the 1980s, peanut butter sandwiches were packed in virtually every lunchbox in America, and nobody asked whether the kid sitting next to yours might die from the smell. Nut allergies, gluten intolerance, and dairy sensitivities were not part of the public vocabulary. School cafeterias served whatever they served, and kids who reacted badly were told they had sensitive stomachs. Birthday parties featured homemade cakes baked without a single thought about allergens. If a child broke out in hives, the parents gave them Benadryl and moved on. The dramatic rise in diagnosed food allergies and the institutional response, nut-free classrooms, ingredient labels, EpiPens in every school nurse's office, belongs entirely to the decades that followed. In the 1980s, food was just food, and allergies were somebody else's problem. A child who swelled up after eating something was told to avoid that food, and that was the end of it. Number 61. Metal playground equipment that blistered in the summer heat. The playgrounds of the 1980s were built to survive, not to protect anyone. Slides were solid sheets of stainless steel that absorbed the full force of the afternoon sun and could raise welts on bare legs. Monkey bars were iron pipes bolted over concrete or packed dirt. Merry-go-rounds spun fast enough to launch a small child into the next county. Seesaws slammed down with enough force to rattle your teeth. There were no rubber mats underneath, no rounded edges, and no shade structures. Kids got burned, bruised, and occasionally broken, and the equipment stayed exactly where it was. The padded, rubberized, safety-certified playgrounds of today are so different from their 1980s ancestors that they might as well be a different invention entirely. The merry-go-round was a centrifuge powered by the strongest kid on the playground. Smaller children gripped the metal bars and held on until they either let go or were thrown off. Every one of these structures would fail a modern safety inspection within seconds. Number 60. Disciplining other people's children. If a kid misbehaved on your block in the 1980s, the nearest adult handled it. A neighbor who caught you throwing rocks at a car window did not call your parents first. They yelled at you, grabbed you by the collar, and marched you home. Teachers who lived on your street might lecture you on a Saturday for something you did at school on Friday. Parents not only accepted this, they expected it. The village raised the child, and the village did not wait for permission. The idea that only a child's own parents had the right to correct that child's behavior was not the cultural norm. Today, confronting or disciplining someone else's child is a social minefield, and most adults will not risk it. The correction was immediate and physical. A swat, A pointed finger, a raised voice, and a march to the front door with a firm grip on the shoulder. The child's own parents would hear about it later, usually from the neighbor, and the most common response was "thank you." Number 59. Blackface and racially offensive Halloween costumes. In the 1980s, Halloween costume choices included options that would cause an immediate scandal today. Adults and children dressed as racial caricatures, wore dark face paint to portray famous people of other races, and assembled costumes built entirely on stereotypes. Party stores sold accessories that reduced entire cultures to a hat or a wig. Neighborhoods handed out candy to children in costumes that mocked ethnic groups, and nobody said a word. Yearbook photos from the era show high school students in blackface at spirit weeks and homecoming events. The cultural understanding of why these costumes are harmful was not widespread. Today, wearing blackface or a racially stereotyped costume is one of the fastest ways to lose a job, a reputation, or both. Costume shops sold pre-packaged kits with foam rubber features that caricatured entire ethnic groups, and they sold out every October. Parents helped their children assemble outfits that reduced other cultures to a collection of props. The intent was never examined because the culture did not require it. Dressing up as a stereotype was entertainment, and entertainment did not carry consequences. Number 58. Older men dating much younger women and nobody questioning it. In the 1980s, a man in his 30s or 40s dating an 18 or 19-year-old was not considered predatory. It was considered lucky. Celebrity culture reinforced it constantly. Rock stars, actors, and politicians appeared publicly with women decades younger, and the press covered it as glamour, not exploitation. At the community level, high school seniors dated men in their mid-20s, and parents were often aware of it. A boss asking his 20-year-old receptionist to dinner was the beginning of a relationship, not the beginning of a lawsuit. The power dynamics embedded in these relationships were not part of the mainstream conversation. Age gap relationships existed in a cultural blind spot where youth in a woman was treated as an asset and experience in a man was treated as an advantage. The reckoning with these dynamics did not arrive in force until the broader cultural shifts of the 2010s. Today, significant age gap relationships, especially those involving an imbalance of power, are examined through a very different lens, and the question of whether genuine consent is possible when the gap is wide enough is asked openly and often. High school girls dated college men who picked them up in muscle cars and brought them home past curfew. Parents met these boyfriends and shook their hands. The dynamic was built into the social architecture of the decade. Movies celebrated it, music glorified it. A 35-year-old man pursuing a 19-year-old was not a predator. He was a catch. The absence of language to describe the power imbalance made it nearly impossible for the younger party to articulate what felt wrong, because the culture insisted nothing was. Number 57. Kids sipping beer at family barbecues. At almost every summer cookout and holiday gathering in the 1980s, somebody's uncle or grandfather offered the kids a sip of beer. It was treated as a rite of passage, a harmless introduction to the adult world. Boys as young as 10 were handed half-empty cans of Budweiser or Miller and told not to tell their mothers. Some families let teenagers drink openly at parties, under the logic that it was better they learn at home than somewhere dangerous. The legal drinking age had been raised to 21 nationwide in 1984, but inside family gatherings nobody enforced it. Today, giving alcohol to a minor, even your own child, carries legal consequences in many states, and the relaxed attitude toward kids and beer has largely disappeared from family culture. The moment was often photographed, a small child making a face after tasting beer for the first time, surrounded by laughing relatives. The beer tasted terrible to a 10-year-old, and that was part of the humor. Number 56. No recycling programs anywhere. In the 1980s, everything went in one bin. Aluminum cans, glass bottles, newspapers, plastic, containers, food scraps, and broken appliances all ended up in the same trash bag, hauled to the curb and dumped in a landfill. Curbside recycling programs were virtually non-existent for most of the decade. A few progressive cities experimented with bottle deposit programs, but the vast majority of Americans had never separated a piece of trash in their lives. Plastic production was booming, single-use packaging was everywhere, and the word sustainability was not part of daily vocabulary. The recycling movement gained real traction in the late 1980s and early 1990s, driven partly by overflowing landfills. Today, most municipalities mandate some form of recycling, and throwing a soda can in the regular trash draws visible disapproval. Aluminum cans piled up in landfills by the billions, glass bottles shattered on the sides of roads, plastic six-pack rings strangled seabirds, and the images of tangled wildlife eventually became one of the most powerful visual arguments for recycling. The shift required an entire generation to unlearn the habit of throwing everything into a single bag. Number 55. Parents leaving a loaded gun in the bedroom closet, unlocked. In the 1980s, gun storage was barely a concept. Shotguns leaned against bedroom walls. Pistols sat in nightstand drawers with no trigger lock, no safe, no cable threaded through the barrel. Children knew where the guns were. In many homes, they were told not to touch them, and that was considered sufficient safety protocol. Hunting rifles hung on wall racks in the living room, visible to every visitor who walked through the front door. Nobody talked about safe storage laws, and very few states had them. The idea that you would lock a firearm away from quick access seemed absurd to most gun owners. Today, safe storage requirements, child access prevention laws, and a string of preventable tragedies have reshaped the entire conversation. Leaving a loaded weapon where a child can reach it is no longer just risky. In many states, it is criminal. Number 54. Sharing prescription drugs with your neighbors. In the 1980s, borrowing a neighbor's leftover antibiotics, pain pills, or muscle relaxers was about as controversial as borrowing a cup of sugar. If your back went out on a Saturday night and you could not get to a doctor until Monday, the neighbor down the street who had some Valium in the medicine cabinet would hand you a few. Mothers traded children's cough medicine over the fence. Grandparents shared heart medication with friends from church. The idea that prescription drugs were calibrated to a specific patient's condition, weight, and medical history was not top of mind for most people. The opioid crisis and tighter pharmaceutical regulations have since made Americans acutely aware of the dangers of casual drug sharing. Today, giving someone else your prescription medication is a criminal offense in most states. The medicine cabinet was a communal resource in many neighborhoods, and the informal pharmacist was the neighbor who happened to have a few pills left over from a dental procedure or a back injury. Number 53. Locking kids out of the house until dinner time. When summer started in the 1980s, many parents had a simple policy. You go outside in the morning, and you do not come back in until dinner is ready. Doors were locked. Knocking was discouraged. The house was off limits during daylight hours. Kids who were bored, hot, thirsty, or needed the bathroom were expected to figure it out. You drank from the garden hose. You used the bathroom at a friend's house. You found shade under a tree. The idea was that being outdoors was good for children, and being indoors watching television was not. It was parenting through expulsion, and it was completely normal. Today, intentionally locking a child out of the house for hours in extreme heat would be grounds for a call to Child Protective Services. You learned the geography of the neighborhood from the outside in. Which fences you could climb, which yards had dogs, which sprinklers ran on a timer, and which garages had shade. Number 52. Using the word retarded as casual slang. In the 1980s, the word retarded was used constantly and without hesitation in schools, offices, and living rooms across America. Kids called each other retarded on the playground. Adults used it to describe anything they found foolish or poorly designed. It appeared in movies, television shows, and stand-up routines as a standard punchline. The fact that the word was a clinical term that had been repurposed into a slur against people with intellectual disabilities was not something most speakers considered. Advocacy groups spent decades pushing back against casual use of the word. Rosa's Law, signed in 2010, officially removed the term from federal health, education, and labor statutes. Today, using the word in casual conversation is considered deeply offensive, and most people recognize it as a slur. Children used it in classrooms, adults used it in business meetings, television personalities used it during interviews. The word appeared in newspaper headlines and movie titles without editorial comment. Its ubiquity was a measure of how completely society had dehumanized the people it was used to describe. Number 51. Homophobic jokes on primetime television. Sitcoms and sketch shows in the 1980s treated homosexuality as an endless source of comedy. Gay characters, when they appeared at all, were flamboyant caricatures played for laughs. Straight characters reacted to the mere suggestion of being gay with exaggerated disgust, and the studio audience roared. Stand-up specials built entire segments around mocking gay men. The laughter was not ironic. It reflected a culture that broadly viewed homosexuality as abnormal, funny, and fair game for ridicule. Even shows that were considered progressive by the standards of the time included jokes that would be unthinkable in a modern writer's room. Today, homophobic humor in mainstream entertainment is a career-ending choice, and the portrayals of LGBTQ characters on television have changed beyond recognition. The audience was trained to see gayness as absurd, and the shows delivered absurdity with studio lighting and a laugh track. Gay characters existed primarily as a source of discomfort for straight characters, and the discomfort was the joke. Number 50. Animal testing for cosmetics as standard practice. Every mascara, lipstick, shampoo, and skin cream on the shelves of an American drugstore in the 1980s had likely been tested on animals at some point in its development. Rabbits, mice, and guinea pigs were subjected to skin irritation tests, eye toxicity tests, and ingestion studies to determine whether a product was safe for human use. The practice was not hidden. It was considered responsible science. Most consumers either did not know or did not care. The animal rights movement, led by organizations that staged graphic public demonstrations, slowly shifted consumer awareness through the late 1980s and 1990s. Cruelty-free labeling emerged as a market differentiator. Today, animal testing for cosmetics has been banned in dozens of countries and several American states, and major brands market their products specifically as never tested on animals. The animals suffered in silence behind laboratory doors, and the products they helped validate sat on the shelves of every bathroom in America. Number 49. No wheelchair ramps or disability access. Public buildings in the 1980s were designed for people who could walk, climb stairs, and open heavy doors, and everyone else was expected to manage. Courthouses, schools, restaurants, and office buildings had steps at every entrance and no elevator in sight. Wheelchair users could not get into most stores, movie theaters, or government offices without someone physically carrying them or their chair up a flight of stairs. Public buses did not kneel or have lifts. Sidewalks did not have curb cuts. The Americans with Disabilities Act was not signed into law until 1990. Before that, the physical exclusion of disabled people from public life was built into the infrastructure itself. Today, accessibility standards are a legal requirement for every public building, and the absence of a ramp or an elevator is a code violation. A person in a wheelchair who wanted to vote might find the polling station at the top of a flight of stairs. The message was consistent. Public life was designed for able-bodied people, and everyone else was expected to adapt, wait, or stay home. Number 48. Chain smoking at dinner parties and holiday gatherings. When guests gathered for a dinner party, a Thanksgiving meal, or a New Year's Eve celebration in the 1980s, the ashtrays came out with the appetizers. Smokers lit up between courses, during courses, and after courses. The smoke curled around the chandelier and settled into the curtains. Non-smokers sat in it because there was no alternative. Children played on the floor beneath a cloud of secondhand smoke while adults talked and poured wine. Hosts set out ashtrays as routinely as they set out napkins. Asking someone not to smoke at a gathering was considered rude. Being a non-smoker at a party in the 1980s meant accepting that your clothes, your hair, and your lungs were going to pay the price. Today, smoking inside someone's home during a dinner party would be unthinkable in most social circles. The non-smoker at the table sat in a fog of secondhand smoke for the entire evening and said nothing, because objecting would have been more disruptive than the smoke itself. Number 47. Sugary cereal marketed as a balanced breakfast. Every Saturday morning in the 1980s, cartoon commercials told children that a bowl of frosted, candy-colored cereal was part of a complete breakfast. The screen showed the cereal next to a glass of orange juice, a piece of toast, and a banana. But no kid was eating all of that. They were eating 3 bowls of sugar with milk. Brands competed to make the sweetest, most brightly colored product on the shelf, and parents bought it because the box said it was fortified with vitamins. A single serving of some of the most popular cereals contained more sugar than a candy bar. Nutritional labeling was minimal, and the word processed was not yet a warning. Today, marketing sugary cereal directly to children is heavily scrutinized, and parents who read the nutrition panel would be alarmed by what passed for breakfast in 1985. The mascot on the box was designed to sell sugar to children before they could read a nutrition label. Parents trusted the packaging because the packaging said fortified, which sounded scientific and responsible. Number 46. Casual use of the word Oriental to describe Asian people. In the 1980s, the word Oriental appeared on restaurant signs, in newspaper articles, in polite dinner conversation, and on census forms. It was used without hesitation or awareness that anyone might find it offensive. Travel agencies advertised Oriental vacations. Furniture stores sold Oriental rugs. People described their Asian neighbors as Oriental families with no sense that the term carried colonial baggage or reduced entire cultures to a Western-facing label. Today, the word is widely recognized as outdated and offensive when applied to people. Several states have formally removed it from official documents and legislation. The shift was not instant, but it was decisive. A term that once sounded neutral now sounds like a relic of a time when entire populations were described from the outside looking in. Number 45. Bosses calling female employees honey, sweetheart, and darling. In offices across America in the 1980s, male managers addressed their female staff with terms of endearment that had nothing to do with endearment and everything to do with hierarchy. Honey, grab a cup of coffee. Sweetheart, make sure those copies are on the desk by noon. Darling, stay late tonight and finish the filing. The words were delivered casually, automatically, as if every woman in the office were interchangeable and existed primarily to serve. Women who objected were told they were overreacting. Women who went along got better assignments. The names were not affection. They were a constant daily reminder of who held the power and who did not. Male employees were never called honey. They were called by their names or by their titles. The asymmetry was invisible to the men who practiced it and painfully obvious to the women who endured it. Human resources departments, where they existed at all, considered it a style issue rather than a policy issue. The legal and cultural framework that eventually classified this behavior as a component of workplace harassment took years to develop. Today, calling a colleague honey or sweetheart in a professional setting is a textbook example of inappropriate workplace conduct, and most companies address it directly in their onboarding training. What was once considered charm is now recognized as condescension. The condescension was structural and invisible to the people who benefited from it. A woman with a master's degree was still called dear by a man who could barely type his own memos. Conference rooms full of men addressed the only woman present as if she were there to take notes, even when she was there to give the presentation. The language was not accidental. It was a tool of diminishment, wrapped in politeness, deployed thousands of times a day in offices from coast to coast. Number 44. Letting a 12-year-old babysit an infant. In the 1980s, middle schoolers were the default childcare solution for most families. A 12 or 13-year-old girl from down the street was trusted to watch a baby, feed it, change its diaper, and put it to bed while the parents went out for the evening. Some started babysitting at 10 or 11. Nobody ran a background check. Nobody asked for a CPR certification. The going rate was a couple of dollars an hour, paid in cash at the end of the night with a ride home. Today, many parents would not leave a 12-year-old in charge of a goldfish, let alone a newborn. Babysitting certification courses, liability concerns, and shifting expectations about child supervision have made the teenage babysitter a much rarer sight than it used to be. Number 43. Pesticide trucks spraying neighborhoods while kids played outside. In the 1980s, municipal trucks rolled through residential neighborhoods spraying clouds of insecticide to control mosquitoes, and kids ran behind them. The fog was thick and chemical and drifted across lawns, porches, and open windows. Children rode their bicycles through the mist like it was a game. Parents watched from the front steps and did not call them inside. The chemicals being sprayed included compounds that have since been restricted or banned for residential use. The long-term health effects on the children who played in those clouds are still being studied. Today, pesticide application near residential areas requires advance notification, buffer zones, and strict regulatory oversight. And the image of children chasing a spray truck is a reminder of how differently risk was understood. The trucks had a schedule, and kids learned it. They knew what time the fog machine would roll through the block, and they'd planned their evening around it. The sound of the truck was the starting gun for a neighborhood sprint that turned a public health operation into a playground game. Number 42. Kids going door to door selling things completely alone. In the 1980s, children knocked on the doors of total strangers to sell candy bars, wrapping paper, magazine subscriptions, and Girl Scout cookies without a parent in sight. Schools and youth organizations sent kids into their neighborhoods and beyond with order, forms, and a sales pitch, and nobody considered the safety implications. A 10-year-old walking 3 blocks from home and ringing the doorbell of someone they had never met was called fundraising, not a risk. The child handled cash, made change, and sometimes entered the homes of strangers to demonstrate a product. Today, most youth organizations require adult supervision for any door-to-door sales, and many have moved to online platforms entirely to avoid the liability. The child carried a clipboard, a pencil, and a pouch full of cash through streets they barely knew. Some orders were placed by check, handed to a minor who could not verify whether it was valid. The entire enterprise operated on trust, familiarity, and the assumption that a child walking through a neighborhood was safe from harm. Number 41. Bullying treated as character building. In the 1980s, getting bullied at school was considered a normal part of growing up. Adults told kids to toughen up, fight back, or ignore it. Teachers who witnessed bullying in the hallway often looked the other way. Parents who complained to the school were told that kids needed to learn to handle conflict on their own. Being picked last, shoved into lockers, called names, or excluded from groups was framed as a social survival skill rather than a harm. The emotional damage it caused was dismissed as oversensitivity. Anti-bullying programs, school counselors trained in intervention, and the recognition that sustained bullying can cause lasting psychological harm did not enter the mainstream until well after the 1980s ended. Today, bullying is treated as a serious behavioral issue with documented consequences, and schools are expected to intervene. The bully operated with near total impunity. Teachers saw the shoving, heard the name-calling, and decided it was between the kids. Parents who demanded intervention were told their child needed to learn to stand up for himself. Number 40. School buses with no seatbelts. Millions of American children rode to school every morning in the 1980s on a vehicle that had no seatbelts. The big yellow buses had high-backed vinyl seats designed to absorb impact through a concept called compartmentalization, but there was nothing holding any child in place. Kids bounced around, stood in the aisle, climbed over seats, and occasionally flew forward when the driver hit the brakes hard. Parents accepted it without question. The school bus was considered one of the safest vehicles on the road, statistically, and seatbelt mandates were seen as unnecessary and expensive. Today, the debate over seatbelts in school buses continues in some states, but the image of 60 children on a bus with no restraints feels increasingly difficult to defend. The noise inside the bus was deafening. 70 children shouting, bouncing, and climbing over one another while a single driver navigated rush-hour traffic with no assistant and no restraint system. Emergency exits were marked, but the idea that children might need them because they were not strapped in during a collision was not part of the calculation. Number 39. Mocking someone's weight at family gatherings. The 1980s family reunion, holiday dinner, or backyard cookout came with a built-in tradition of body commentary. Aunts pinched cheeks and announced that someone had gotten heavy. Uncles patted stomachs and made jokes about second helpings. Grandparents compared grandchildren's sizes out loud at the table. Teenagers who had gained weight over the summer were told about it before they could sit down. It was not considered cruel. It was considered honest, and in many families it was considered caring. The person making the comment often believed they were helping. The person receiving it learned to dread holidays. Today, commenting on someone's body at a family gathering is recognized as harmful, and most families have at least one member who will shut it down. The comments were delivered as love, as concern, as humor, and as truth. Nobody considered the possibility that a teenager hearing you have really let yourself go from a grandparent at Thanksgiving might carry that sentence for the next 20 years. Number 38. Baby walkers rolling toward open staircases. In the 1980s, baby walkers were in nearly every home with a toddler. The device was a wheeled frame with a fabric seat that allowed babies who could not yet walk to scoot around the house at surprising speed. The problem was staircases. Babies in walkers rolled down flights of stairs with enough regularity that emergency rooms across the country treated walker-related injuries by the thousands every year. The walkers also gave babies access to stoves, pools, cleaning supplies, and other hazards they would not have been able to reach on their own. Canada banned baby walkers entirely in 2004. The United States tightened safety standards significantly, but did not ban them outright. Today, most pediatricians advise against walkers, and the old-style models that allowed full mobility near stairs have largely vanished from the market. Number 37. Aerosol cans destroying the ozone layer. In the 1980s, aerosol spray cans were used for everything. Hairspray, deodorant, insect repellent, cooking spray, spray paint, and air freshener all came in pressurized cans that released chlorofluorocarbons, known as CFCs, into the atmosphere. Scientists had identified CFCs as the primary cause of ozone layer depletion as early as 1974, but consumer behavior was slow to change. The hole in the ozone layer above Antarctica became a global headline in the mid-1980s, and the Montreal Protocol of 1987 set the stage for a worldwide phase-out. American manufacturers began switching to alternative propellants, but the transition took years. Today, CFC-based aerosols are banned globally, and the ozone layer is slowly recovering. But the era when a can of hairspray contributed to a planetary crisis is not something most people forget. The spray can was a symbol of convenience, and convenience was the defining value of the decade. The idea that a product designed to make life easier could be slowly destroying the atmosphere was a contradiction the 1980s were not equipped to process. Number 36. Office holiday parties that ended in blackout drinking. The company Christmas party of the 1980s was a different animal. Open bars, no oversight, and a room full of coworkers who spent 50 weeks a year under fluorescent lights, suddenly thrown together with unlimited alcohol. People drank too much, said things they should not have said, and did things they spent the rest of January regretting. Affairs started, careers ended, somebody always photocopied a body part. The morning after was a shared hangover across the entire office. Today, most companies have scaled back dramatically. Many have eliminated alcohol entirely. The ones that still serve it impose drink limits, end the event early, and send reminders about the company code of conduct beforehand. The era of the anything goes office party is gone. The morning after stories were told with a mix of embarrassment and pride. Somebody always did something legendary, and the legend grew with each retelling through the rest of January. The party was a pressure valve, and the 1980s kept the valve wide open. Number 35. Spanking children in public and being praised for it. If a child threw a tantrum in a grocery store in the 1980s, the most common response from the parent was a swift swat on the behind, right there in the cereal aisle. Other shoppers nodded approvingly. Strangers made comments like, "That is how you do it," or "That child needed it." Physical discipline in public was not just tolerated. It was celebrated as evidence of good parenting. A parent who did not spank was seen as permissive, soft, or raising a brat. The conversation about the psychological effects of corporal punishment on children was happening in academic circles, but it had not reached the general public. Today, spanking a child in a public setting draws stares, phone cameras, and in some cases, reports to authorities. Parenting books of the era endorsed spanking as an effective discipline tool. Religious leaders cited scripture in support of physical punishment. The consensus across institutions was that a child who feared physical consequences was a well-behaved child, and a well-behaved child was the product of good parenting. Number 34. Housewives on tranquilizers. In the 1980s, millions of American women took benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax to get through the day. Doctors prescribed them freely for anxiety, insomnia, and a catch-all condition vaguely described as nerves. The pills were so closely associated with suburban motherhood that they earned the nickname Mother's Little Helper, borrowed from the Rolling Stones song that had identified the trend 2 decades earlier. Women took them before school drop-off, before grocery shopping, and before their husbands came home from work. The prescriptions were easy to get and easy to refill. The addictive nature of benzodiazepines was downplayed, and women who became dependent were often blamed for weakness rather than overprescription. Today, benzodiazepine prescribing is subject to far stricter guidelines, and the casual medicating of women for the stress of domestic life is recognized as a troubling chapter in American medicine. Number 33. No concept of a designated driver. Leaving a party or a bar in the 1980s usually meant whoever felt the least drunk grabbed the keys. The idea that one person in the group should stay completely sober for the sole purpose of driving everyone home safely was not standard social practice for most of the decade. Groups of friends piled into cars after nights out, and the driver had often had just as much to drink as everyone else. The designated driver concept was popularized in the United States by a Harvard public health campaign that began in 1988, but it took years for the idea to become genuinely embedded in social behavior. Today, the designated driver is a default assumption in most social groups, and ride-sharing apps have made the excuse of having no sober driver almost obsolete. Number 32. Prank phone calls as neighborhood entertainment. Before caller ID existed, the telephone was an instrument of anonymous mischief. Kids in the 1980s picked up the rotary phone, dialed a random number, and asked the person who answered if their refrigerator was running. The jokes were terrible, but the anonymity made them irresistible. Teenagers spent entire Friday nights calling strangers, disguising their voices, and hanging up. Some prank calls were harmless. Others were genuinely frightening for the person on the receiving end, especially elderly people living alone. The introduction of caller ID in the late 1980s and early 1990s destroyed the entire enterprise overnight. Today, prank calling a stranger would likely be traced immediately and, depending on the content, could be classified as harassment. The beauty of the prank call was its low stakes and its anonymity. You could be anyone, say anything, and hang up before the consequences caught up with you. Entire sleepovers were organized around the telephone, and the best prank caller in the group had the status of a minor celebrity. Number 31. Racist team mascots and logos proudly displayed everywhere. In the 1980s, professional and amateur sports teams across the country used mascots, names, and logos that caricatured Native Americans, and fans wore them with pride. Foam tomahawks, feathered headdresses, and face paint designed to mimic indigenous people filled stadiums. High school teams had names that would cause an immediate uproar today. The mascots were defended as honoring tradition, and efforts by Native American advocacy groups to challenge them were dismissed as overly sensitive. The cultural shift has been slow but significant. Several major professional teams have changed their names in recent years, and schools across the country have retired mascots that were once a source of community identity. Today, the casual use of racial caricatures in sports branding is widely recognized as offensive. The chop motion, the war paint, the headdress made of craft store feathers and a headband. Children performed these gestures at pep rallies and homecoming games without any understanding of the cultures they were mocking. The mascot was not just a logo, it was a living, performed caricature that entire communities rallied around. Number 30. Writing a personal check at the grocery store and holding up the entire line. In the 1980s, pulling out a checkbook at the register was completely normal. You wrote the check, showed your driver's license, waited for the cashier to copy down your details by hand, and everyone behind you stood there, patient or not. The process took 2 or 3 minutes at best, and nobody considered it rude. It was simply how people paid for things. Stores had signs that said, "We accept personal checks," as though it were a selling point. Some places even let you write a check for more than the total and get cash back, a primitive version of the debit card transaction that would not exist for another decade. Bounce checks were common enough that stores kept lists of banned check writers taped behind the counter. The cashier would study your license, compare signatures, and sometimes call a manager over if the amount was above a certain threshold. It was an entire ritual, performed in full view of a growing line of increasingly annoyed shoppers who all understood the delay because they did the same thing on their own grocery runs. Today, writing a personal check at a grocery store would bring the line to a confused halt. The cashier might not even know what to do with it. Debit cards, credit cards, tap to pay, and phone wallets have made the personal check a museum piece. Pulling one out in public now would get you the same look you would get if you tried to pay with a handful of wooden tokens from a board game. The whole ritual, the pen, the register, the carbon copy, has vanished from daily life so completely that most people under 30 have never written a check at all. Number 29. Teachers having a drink at school events. At school dances, faculty picnics, and end-of-year celebrations in the 1980s, it was not unusual for teachers to have a beer or a glass of wine in the presence of students. The teacher who chaperoned the prom had a flask in his jacket. The coach who hosted the team barbecue had a cooler full of cold ones. It was treated as adults being adults, and nobody made a fuss about it. The line between a teacher's professional life and personal behavior was drawn much more loosely. Today, any teacher caught consuming alcohol at a school-sponsored event, even one held off campus, would face immediate consequences, and many districts have explicit policies banning it. The flask was not hidden. It was understood. Faculty softball games ended with a cooler of beer shared openly on the field. The assumption was that teachers were adults, and adults could handle a drink without it affecting their professional judgment. The boundary between the teacher as authority figure and the teacher as human being was permeable in a way that modern schools have deliberately sealed. Number 28. Men ordering for women at restaurants. In the 1980s, a man sitting down at a restaurant with a woman was expected to order for both of them. He studied the menu, chose her meal, and relayed both orders to the waiter while she sat silently. It was taught in etiquette guides as the proper way to dine. Women who spoke directly to the waiter were sometimes met with a surprised look from the server and a disapproving glance from their date. The practice reinforced a dynamic in which the man made decisions and the woman accepted them, even in something as simple as choosing between chicken and fish. Today, a man ordering for a woman without her input would be seen as controlling at best and patronizing at worst, and most etiquette guides have quietly retired the advice. The practice extended beyond restaurants. Men signed for women, spoke for women in meetings, and made decisions about women's medical care without consulting them. The ordering for women tradition was one visible expression of a much larger pattern in which women's preferences were treated as secondary to the man's judgment about what was appropriate. Number 27. Kids shooting BB guns in the neighborhood. In the 1980s, a Daisy Red Ryder BB gun was one of the most popular Christmas gifts for boys between the ages of 8 and 12. Kids took them into backyards, vacant lots, and wooded areas and spent entire afternoons shooting at cans, bottles, birds, and occasionally each other. There was no adult supervision, no protective eyewear, and no conversation about gun safety beyond the instruction not to aim it at your brother's face. Some kids carried their BB guns openly through suburban streets on the way to a friend's house, and no one called the police. Today, a child walking down a residential street carrying anything that resembles a firearm would trigger an immediate emergency response, and the consequences of that misunderstanding have been tragically demonstrated more than once. The BB gun was a backyard staple, as common as a basketball hoop or a tetherball pole. The distinction between a toy and a weapon was not drawn for most families until something went wrong. Number 26. Smoking in movie theaters. Going to the movies in the early 1980s meant sitting in a dark room with 100 strangers, half of whom were smoking. The glow of lit cigarettes dotted the theater like orange fireflies. Smoke drifted in front of the projector beam, creating a visible haze between you and the screen. Armrests had built-in ashtrays. The carpet smelled like a combination of popcorn butter and stale tobacco. Ushers did not ask anyone to put out their cigarette. The practice was standard and unquestioned until theater chains began banning smoking in the mid-1980s, following the same wave of indoor smoking restrictions that eventually cleared offices, restaurants, and public buildings. Today, the idea of lighting a cigarette in a movie theater is so far removed from modern reality that most people under 40 cannot imagine it. The curtain did not keep the smoke out. The velvet seats absorbed it. The carpet held it. Decades of accumulated tobacco residue gave older movie theaters a smell that no amount of cleaning could fully remove. Even after the bans took effect, the ghosts of a million cigarettes lingered in the upholstery for years. Number 25. Joke gifts that mocked entire groups of people. Novelty shops in the 1980s sold gag gifts that traded on every stereotype imaginable. Coffee mugs, bumper stickers, T-shirts, and greeting cards featured jokes about women, minorities, gay people, disabled people, and the overweight. They were displayed in shopping mall storefronts and handed out at office Secret Santa exchanges without a second thought. The humor was broad and blunt and aimed at easy targets. A joke that reduced an entire group of people to a punchline was not considered offensive. It was considered funny. Spencer Gifts and its imitators built entire business models around this kind of humor. Today, most of those products would not survive a social media screenshot, and the stores that sold them have either adapted or disappeared. Birthday cards featured jokes about women drivers, dumb blondes, and nagging wives. Novelty stores displayed products that reduced entire categories of people to their most reductive stereotype, and shoppers bought them without hesitation as gifts for friends, family, and co-workers. Number 24. No content warnings on anything. Movies, television shows, books, and live performances in the 1980s carried no trigger warnings, no content advisories, and no sensitivity disclaimers. A film could contain graphic violence, sexual assault, racial slurs, and disturbing imagery, and the audience walked in blind. Parents sent children to movies rated PG that contained scenes that would earn an R rating today. Television shows aired episodes dealing with abuse, addiction, and death without any preceding notice. The concept of a content warning did not exist in mainstream American media. If something bothered you, you were expected to handle it or leave. Today, content warnings are standard on streaming platforms, podcasts, live events, and university syllabi. And the debate over how much warning is appropriate continues. A child sitting in a theater watching a horror film dealt with whatever they saw on their own terms. There was no pause button, no parental filter, and no conversation about processing what they had just witnessed. Number 23. Coaches using physical intimidation as motivation. Football coaches, wrestling coaches, and gym teachers in the 1980s operated under a philosophy that pain produced performance. Coaches grabbed players by their face masks, shoved them into walls, and screamed insults inches from their faces. Running until you vomited was a punishment and a point of pride. Withholding water during practice in extreme heat was standard policy in some programs, and it killed young athletes. A coach who threw a clipboard at a player or slapped a helmet hard enough to ring someone's ears was called intense, not abusive. Players who complained were benched. Parents who objected were told their child was soft. Today, a coach who physically contacts a student-athlete in anger faces immediate termination, and youth sports organizations have implemented codes of conduct that would have been unrecognizable in the 1980s. Number 22. Casual sexist jokes in the workplace. Every office in the 1980s had a guy who told jokes about women. He told them at the water cooler, in meetings, at lunch, and at the company picnic. The jokes were about women's intelligence, their appearance, their supposed inability to drive, and their place in the home. They were told in front of female colleagues who were expected to laugh along or at least not make a scene. Complaining about it marked you as someone who could not take a joke. The jokes circulated in office memos, were pinned to bulletin boards, and appeared in desk calendars. They were woven so deeply into the culture of American workplaces that many men did not recognize them as hostile. Today, telling a sexist joke in a professional setting is a documented offense in most employee handbooks, and the tolerance for it has evaporated. Number 21. Letting toddlers roam the front yard without supervision. A 2- or 3-year-old playing alone in the front yard in the 1980s was not unusual. Parents put the child outside with a few toys and went back to whatever they were doing inside the house. The child wandered the lawn, walked to the edge of the driveway, and sometimes made it to the sidewalk before anyone noticed. Neighbors kept a loose eye out, and the unspoken assumption was that the child would be fine. No one called it neglect. No one called anyone. The definition of adequate supervision for a small child has shifted so dramatically that a toddler alone in a front yard in many neighborhoods today would prompt a phone call to the police within minutes. Fenced yards offered some containment, but chain-link fences in the 1980s were rarely tall enough to stop a determined 2-year-old. Gates were left unlatched. Driveways backed directly onto the play area. The margin for error was thin, and the consequences of a miscalculation were severe. Number 20. Using words like colored and oriental in polite conversation. In the 1980s, many older Americans still used terms like colored and oriental to describe Black and Asian people, and they did so without any awareness that the words were offensive. These terms appeared in everyday conversation, church bulletins, community newsletters, and even some official documents. The people using them often believed they were being respectful because the words had been considered polite in their youth. The generational shift in acceptable language was happening in real time, and it created friction between older speakers who resisted change and younger people who recognized the harm. Today, both terms are widely understood as outdated and offensive, and using them in any public setting would draw immediate correction. The correction, when it came, was often met with defensiveness. The speaker genuinely did not understand why a word they had used their entire life was suddenly wrong. The gap between intention and impact was wide, and closing it required patience that not everyone had. Number 19. Smoking in grocery stores and shopping malls. In the early 1980s, you could light a cigarette anywhere you went. Grocery stores had ashtrays at the end of every aisle. Shopping malls had them on every bench. Department stores had them next to the perfume counters, which created a uniquely nauseating combination. Shoppers browsed clothing racks with a lit cigarette between their fingers, dropping ash on the merchandise. Checkout lines moved slowly while the cashier finished her own cigarette before scanning your items. The smoke mixed with the fluorescent lighting and the muzak to create an atmosphere that defined indoor public spaces for decades. Indoor smoking bans swept through retail spaces in the late 1980s and 1990s, and today the idea of smoking while shopping for produce is as foreign as using a rotary phone. The smoke clung to produce, to bread, to the fabric of your coat. A trip to the grocery store meant coming home smelling like you had spent the afternoon in a bar. The cashier's fingers were yellowed from nicotine, and nobody noticed because everyone's fingers looked the same. Number 18. Open container laws barely enforced. Cracking a beer in the passenger seat of a moving car in the 1980s was not the scandal it is today. Open container laws existed in some states, but enforcement was inconsistent, and in many rural areas, drinking while riding in a car was simply what people did on long drives, at tailgates, and during holiday road trips. You drivers kept a can between their legs. Passengers passed bottles around the back seat. Pull over to the shoulder of a county road and you would find a lineup of empties tossed into the ditch. The federal government did not incentivize states to adopt open container laws until 1998. Today, an open container of alcohol visible in a moving vehicle is grounds for a traffic stop in every state, and the casual road beer of the 1980s exists only in memory. Number 17. The casting couch as an open secret in Hollywood. Everyone in the entertainment industry in the 1980s knew what the casting couch meant. Young actors and actresses were told, sometimes explicitly and sometimes through implication, that sexual favors could help their careers. Powerful producers, directors, and studio executives leveraged their positions to exploit people who wanted to work, and the system protected them. The phrase casting couch was used casually in interviews, comedy routines, and magazine profiles as if it were a quirky industry tradition rather than a pattern of sexual exploitation. Agents warned their clients, colleagues whispered about it, journalists occasionally hinted at it. But the full cultural reckoning with the casting couch and the men who maintained it did not arrive until decades later. Today, the term carries the weight of a systemic abuse scandal, and the entertainment industry, at least publicly, no longer treats it as a joke. Number 16. No background checks for almost anything. In the 1980s, getting hired for a job, renting an apartment, volunteering with children, or buying a firearm involved almost no verification of who you actually were. Employers checked references by calling the phone numbers you provided on a piece of paper. Landlords took your word for it. Schools let parent volunteers walk in and spend unsupervised time with students after nothing more than a sign-up sheet. Gun purchases at shops required minimal paperwork, and private sales required none at all. The comprehensive background check systems that Americans now take for granted, criminal history databases, credit reports, sex offender registries, did not exist in their current form. Today, nearly every significant transaction involving trust requires a background check, and the 1980s approach of taking people at their word feels dangerously naive. A convicted felon could rent an apartment next to a family with children, and nobody would know. A sex offender could volunteer at a youth group, and the only screening was a handshake and a smile. The systems that now catch these gaps did not exist, and the gaps were enormous. Number 15. Letting grade school children walk home from school alone. In the 1980s, kids as young as 6 walked home from school by themselves. They crossed busy streets, cut through vacant lots, walked past construction sites, and navigated several blocks of neighborhood streets without an adult in sight. Older, siblings, sometimes only 8 or 9 themselves, were put in charge of younger ones for the walk home. Parents who drove their kids to school were the exception, not the rule. The walk home was a daily adventure that taught independence, navigation, and the ability to avoid the dog on Elm Street. Today, a parent who allows a first grader to walk home alone risks a report to Child Protective Services, and the school pickup line has become a defining ritual of modern parenthood. The walk was longer than modern parents would believe. Some children crossed 4-lane roads, navigated freeway underpasses, and cut through industrial areas to shave time off the route. The school did not track who arrived by what method. You showed up, and that was enough. Number 14. Secondhand smoke as the permanent background of American life. This is not just about one place where people smoked. This is about the fact that in the 1980s, tobacco smoke was woven into the fabric of almost every indoor space in the country. It hung in the air at the office. It filled the break room at the factory. It drifted through the aisles of the grocery store. It greeted you at the bowling alley, the hair salon, the bank, the dentist's waiting room, the airport gate, and the back seat of every taxi. You could not escape it. Non-smokers breathed it at work, at home, at school, and in every restaurant and bar. Children sat in rooms thick with it while their parents played cards. Babies slept in cribs in houses where both parents smoked with the windows closed. The concept of secondhand smoke as a legitimate health risk was only beginning to gain traction. The Surgeon General's report on the dangers of environmental tobacco smoke was published in 1986, and it took another 2 decades of legislation, lawsuits, and public health campaigns to clear the air. The 1980s were the last decade when smoking was truly everywhere, tolerated by everyone, and inescapable for anyone who shared the same air. Today, the idea of breathing someone else's cigarette smoke indoors is not just unpleasant. It is treated as a violation of your right to clean air, and the laws of nearly every state back that up. The smoke was in your clothes when you got dressed in the morning because someone had smoked in the laundry room the night before. It was in your car because the previous owner had smoked in it. It was in hotel rooms, elevators, buses, trains, and the lobbies of every public building. Flight attendants breathed it for entire careers. Bartenders worked in it for decades. Children grew up in it without ever choosing to. The cumulative exposure of an entire generation to environmental tobacco smoke is a public health story that is still being measured and understood. Number 13. Giving children cough syrup with codeine. When a child had a bad cough in the 1980s, the medicine cabinet solution was often a thick, sweet syrup that contained codeine, an opioid. Doctors prescribed it readily. Pharmacies sold some formulations over the counter. Parents measured it out with a kitchen spoon, not a calibrated syringe, and gave it to children as young as 2. The syrup knocked the child out, which was considered a feature, not a side effect. It suppressed the cough and put the kid to sleep, and that was seen as mission accomplished. The understanding of opioid risks in pediatric patients, including respiratory depression, was not widely communicated to parents. Today, codeine-containing cough syrups are restricted or banned for use in children, and the Food and Drug Administration has issued explicit warnings against giving them to anyone under 12. Number 12. Making jokes about someone's disability directly to their face. In the 1980s, people with visible disabilities, physical or intellectual, were subjected to open mockery with little social consequence for the person doing it. Classmates imitated the way a disabled student walked or talked. Co-workers made jokes at the expense of a colleague with a hearing aid or a speech impediment. Television sketch shows built characters around exaggerated portrayals of disabled people, and the audience laughed. The word cripple was tossed around in casual conversation. The idea that disabled people deserved not only legal protection but basic social respect was not universally accepted. Today, making fun of someone's disability is considered one of the clearest forms of cruelty, and public figures who do it face swift and severe consequences. The mockery was so normalized that disabled people often learned to laugh along, because pushing back invited more of the same. The social cost of objecting was higher than the social cost of being the joke. Number 11. Telling overweight people to just eat less. Diet advice in the 1980s came in one flavor: eat less and exercise more. If you were overweight, the assumption was that you lacked discipline. Doctors delivered the message bluntly. Family members delivered it at the dinner table. Magazine covers reinforced it with headlines about miracle diets and before and after photos. The medical understanding of obesity as a complex condition influenced by genetics, metabolism, environment, hormones, and mental health was not part of the mainstream conversation. Overweight people were blamed for their bodies, and the blame was delivered without embarrassment. Today, the medical and cultural approach to weight has shifted significantly, and the simplistic advice to just eat less is recognized as both scientifically incomplete and emotionally harmful. The shame was public and personal. Magazine ads showed women in swimsuits next to the words "lose 10 pounds by summer," and nobody questioned whether the message was helpful or harmful. Number 10. Kids playing with realistic toy guns in public. In the 1980s, toy guns looked exactly like real guns. Cap guns, water pistols, and plastic revolvers were made from dark metal-colored plastic with no orange tip, no bright color, and no obvious way to tell them apart from the real thing at a distance. Children carried them through neighborhoods, pointed them at each other in parks, and played elaborate games of cops and robbers on front lawns. No parent considered the possibility that a passing stranger or a police officer might mistake the toy for a weapon. The requirement for blaze orange tips on toy firearms did not become federal law until 1988, and even then, kids removed them. Today, a child pointing a realistic-looking object at someone in a public space triggers a very different response, and the tragic consequences of that confusion have been documented too many times. Number 9. Newspaper personal ads with explicit preferences for age, race, and body type. The classified section of any major newspaper in the 1980s contained personal ads that specified exactly what the person was looking for in a partner, and the specifics would not survive 5 minutes on a modern dating app. Single white male seeking petite Asian female under 25. No fatties, whites only. These preferences were printed in black and white, paid for by the word, and read by millions. Nobody at the newspaper refused to run them. Nobody wrote an editorial about it. They sat next to the used car listings and the apartment rentals as if they were just another transaction. Today, writing a personal ad or a dating profile with those explicit exclusions would be flagged, removed, and likely screenshots shared as evidence of who not to date. Number 8. Leaving kids home alone for the entire summer. When both parents worked in the 1980s and many families could not afford daycare, the solution was simple. The kids stayed home, alone. Children as young as 8 were given a house key on a string around their neck and instructions to stay inside, do not answer the door, and make yourself a sandwich for lunch. They were called latchkey kids, and there were millions of them. They watched television, played in the house, and sometimes wandered outside despite being told not to. There were no after-school programs to catch them and no summer camps that cost a day's wages. The term latchkey was used with more sympathy than judgment because everyone understood that families did what they had to do. Today, leaving a young child home alone for extended periods is considered neglect in many jurisdictions, and the support systems that did not exist in the 1980s are now expected to fill the gap. Number 7. Making fun of someone's disability in public and getting laughs. Stand-up comedians in the 1980s regularly mocked physical and intellectual disabilities as part of their acts, and audiences rewarded them for it. Characters with disabilities on television were played for sympathy or for laughs, rarely for depth. School children imitated classmates who used wheelchairs or had speech impediments, and teachers did not always intervene. Adults at parties told jokes about blind people, deaf people, and people with Down syndrome, and the room laughed. The cultural norm was that a disability was a visible difference, and visible differences were fair game for humor. The shift toward treating disabled people as full participants in society, rather than as objects of pity or comedy, has been one of the quieter but most significant social changes since the 1980s. The jokes were told at parties, in break rooms, and at family dinners, and the only person who did not laugh was usually the person the joke was about. The silence of the target was taken as proof that they could handle it, which justified telling the next joke and the next one after that. Number 6. Driving with an open beer between your legs. This was not limited to back roads and country highways. In the 1980s, plenty of Americans drove through towns, suburbs, and city streets with a cold can of beer wedged between their thighs. It was so common that cup holders in cars were partly designed to accommodate cans and bottles. A man driving home from a barbecue on a Saturday evening with a Budweiser in his hand was not a criminal. He was just a guy driving home from a barbecue. Police who pulled someone over for a minor infraction and spotted an open beer were often more interested in the infraction than the beverage. Enforcement depended heavily on the officer and the county. Today, an open alcoholic beverage in the passenger compartment of a vehicle is a citation at minimum in every state, and the casual road beer is a relic of a time when personal responsibility was the only safety policy. Number 5. No expiration dates or nutritional labels on most food products. Walk through a grocery store in the early 1980s and you would find cans, boxes, and packages with no expiration date, no best by date, no calorie count, no ingredient list in a readable format, and no allergy warnings. You bought food based on the brand name, the picture on the box, and whether the can was dented. If something smelled wrong, you threw it out. Otherwise, you ate it and hoped for the best. The Nutrition Labeling and Education Act was not signed into law until 1990, and mandatory nutritional panels did not appear on most packaged foods until 1994. Today, every packaged food product in the United States carries detailed nutritional information, ingredient lists, allergen warnings, and date labels, and consumers have come to expect that level of transparency as a basic right. Number 4. Picking up and kissing someone else's baby without asking. In the 1980s, a baby in public was community property. Strangers in grocery stores, church lobbies, and doctors' waiting rooms walked up to a mother with a newborn, leaned into the stroller, and kissed the baby on the face. They pinched cheeks, stroked hair, and held the baby without permission. Grandmotherly women were the most frequent offenders, but they were not the only ones. The mother was expected to be flattered, not alarmed. Objecting to a stranger touching your child was seen as rude and overprotective. The awareness of germs, boundaries, and the simple concept of bodily autonomy, even for infants, was not part of the cultural script. Today, reaching into a stranger's stroller and touching their baby would be met with a firm step backward, a sharp word, and in some cases, a confrontation. The pandemic accelerated this shift, but the seeds were planted long before. Number 3. Teachers physically grabbing misbehaving students. A teacher in the 1980s who grabbed a disruptive student by the arm, pulled a child out of a chair, or shoved a teenager against a locker was not committing assault. That teacher was maintaining order. The physical handling of students was so routine that most parents did not question it. A firm grip, a yank by the collar, a push toward the door. These were tools in the disciplinary toolkit, used daily and without paperwork. Students who were grabbed did not report it because there was nothing to report. It was normal. The line between discipline and physical abuse in schools was drawn in a very different place than it is today. Modern schools train staff explicitly to avoid any physical contact with students during disciplinary encounters, and a teacher who grabs a student risks termination, legal action, and the end of a career. Number 2. Recording people without their knowledge or consent. In the 1980s, tape recorders were small enough to carry in a pocket, and cameras were everywhere, and almost nobody worried about being recorded. People taped phone conversations without telling the other party. Employers recorded their employees. Neighbors pointed cameras at each other's properties. Home video cameras captured strangers in the background at parks and public events, and the footage was shared freely. The legal landscape around recording and consent was a patchwork, and most people did not know the laws in their own state. Wiretapping was illegal, but casual recording existed in a gray zone that few people thought about. Today, privacy law has expanded dramatically. Recording someone without their consent can be a crime in many states, and the cultural expectation of being informed when a camera or microphone is active is deeply embedded in daily life. Number 1. Blowing cigarette smoke directly in someone's face. If you did not smoke in the 1980s, you knew what it felt like. You were sitting in a restaurant, standing at a bus stop, or waiting in line at the bank, and someone next to you exhaled a cloud of cigarette smoke that hit you square in the face. Some smokers did it carelessly. Others did it deliberately, especially during arguments, as an act of dominance or dismissal. Either way, non-smokers were expected to tolerate it. Waving the smoke away or asking someone to blow it in another direction was considered an overreaction. Complaining about it to management at a restaurant or a workplace was pointless because management was probably smoking too. The smoker's right to smoke outweighed the non-smoker's desire to breathe clean air. It was the ultimate expression of a cultural hierarchy that placed the comfort of smokers above the health of everyone else. Today, deliberately blowing smoke in someone's face would be treated as an act of aggression in nearly any setting, and in some jurisdictions it could be classified as assault. And that is all 100 things that were perfectly normal in the 1980s and would cause an uproar today. Some of them were dangerous, some of them were cruel, some of them were just a different time with different rules and a much thicker skin. If you grew up in that era, you lived through all of it and you turned out just fine. Or at least you have a good story to tell. Let us know in the comments which of these you remember most and which one surprised you the most to see on this list. If you made it all the way to the end, hit that subscribe button. More videos like this one are on the way. Thanks for watching.